Shipwreck 64 is a game developed by Squeaks as a passion project that mixes the classic gameplay of Nintendo 64 titles like Mario or Banjo, and some of the best constructed horror I've ever seen in a game. Shipwreck 64 has it all. It's a combination of the classic creepiness of EXE creepypastas and the crypticism associated with an ARG. Does it go into full ARG mode at times? Yes, but it always keeps it wrapped up in the interactive video game experience you're playing it for. This video isn't going to be about solving the mysteries or anything like that, simply because I haven't done so yet, and I don't think anyone will actually fully unravel Shipwrecked for a long time. We have glimpses, ideas, but nothing is fully concrete, and you shouldn't trust what your eyes see. This, my friends, is Shipwreck 64. So what is this video actually going to be about if it's not going to be about the mystery and the story? Well, it's going to be about what Shipwreck does right, what it arguably does wrong, and why I think it sets a massive precedent for indie and mascot horror as a whole. I also managed to get the game's developer and friend of mine, Squeaks, to talk about some of the decisions he made when making the game. But first, let's start with a very basic summary of what Shipwrecked is and why it amazed me. Shipwrecked is a game that was developed in 1996 for the Nintendo 64 and published in 1997, where it was unfortunately only on store shelves for 3 days. It had since been taken down and become lost media. However, the original game was eventually found and repaired for a 2023 release, which is the game you can find on Steam now. The game itself follows Bucky Beaver and his friends after a fishing trip leaves them stranded on Nulla Terra. Nulla Terra is an island with an active volcano and a society of wolves, and it's your job as Bucky to round up your friends, fix your ship, and leave the island. These friends include Olive the Otter, Walter the Walrus, and Giovanni the Goose. However, there are several other major characters, including Chief Wolf, Stumbler O'Hare, and a mysterious man named JD. Each of these characters have a level you need to complete to get closer to whatever your end goal may be, whether that be leaving the island with just your friends, or taking a hidden barge to save the whole island. The game itself is fairly short and easy, with your most basic tasks being to open up a dam, collect coconuts, or turn dials on a stove. But things change when you actually win or lose. Once you finish the game, you unlock the original 1997 release, with a warning that it may not be for the faint of heart due to artifacting. But, as you may have guessed, playing this version of the game that was purposely pulled from store shelves leads you to discover why exactly that was the case. I don't want to spoil anything necessarily, as a lot of this game is best experienced on your own, so let's get into the actual horror of this horror game. You'll eventually discover something tragic within the game. Footage, recounts, and depictions of an actor wearing the Bucky Beaver costume brutally killing the other costume characters. One in particular, Olive, will end up getting a lot of screen time, so we'll definitely be keeping track of her. Or should I say, Olivia. The further you dig into this game, the more cryptic the puzzles become and the more danger you step into. This game is divided into layers. The outer world, the basic game, is layer 1. The next layer, the second layer, is creepy but relatively safe, simply introducing you to the dangers that will greet you in the next layer, layer 3. This is where you're introduced to the Dwellers, otherwise known as the Starlings. They appear as grotesque versions of Bucky's friends, morphed and twisted into monsters. They produce horrible sounds, they chase you at pretty high speeds, and they'll pretty much always be a threat in the plaza, which is in many ways the hardest portion of the game in terms of difficulty. In this level, you'll encounter Olive, Walter, and Giovanni as Dwellers, but there's still more to come in later levels, including Bucky and a unique character named Blot, a character older than the rest of the cast and developed by Rex. This is where the game shifts from a fairly creepy platformer with light messaging of something larger ahead to a straight-up horror game where the past has come to torment the present. So let's talk about why this horror is some of the most effective horror I have ever experienced in a video game. It all starts with the beginning of the game. To put it simply, Shipwreck 64 is fun. It's a great time. Bucky feels sublime to control, with the jump very similar to Mario's long jump in Mario 64. There's wall jumping and ledge grabbing, as well as a basic punch which you really only need in a couple parts of the game. It lulls you into this false sense of security. To put it in simple terms, the first part of this game isn't a horror game at all. It's just a pleasant Nintendo-style experience that you can probably beat in an hour or less, depending on whether you know what you're doing or not. Death and deception is far from your mind when you're just looking for coconuts and chests and trees. The first sign of trouble never even appears until you boot up the second version of the game. In this version still, you may not experience anything creepy just playing normally. In fact, I got the good ending playing this version, but things start getting strange when you purposely fail the minigames. The first couple times you fail, something strange is bound to happen. For example, failing Olive's minigame twice will take you to a room where you can watch a film showing Olivia's last phone call. Failing one more time brings you to a scene where Olive is floating, dead in the water, while another Bucky watches over her and just leaves. After this, Olive can't be seen on the island again, but a now eyeless version of her model will follow you around in other levels. Something similar happens in other levels as well. Failing Giovanni's and seeing how he died will now have stoves and ovens spawning in other levels. But the important thing is that when these characters quote-unquote die, you'll be able to access the second layer. The puzzles here are cryptic and oftentimes require you to decipher some sort of code. For instance, RXBC. In order to decipher these letters into a 4-number code, you'll need to find a tape. On the tape will be a man reciting letters in the NATO phonetic alphabet. To get the number code to unlock this gate, you'll need to tally up the number of times each letter is spoken on the tape. Romeo, X-Ray, Bravo, and Charlie. Would you believe me if I told you this was one of the easier puzzles in the game? Things only get more difficult, more stressful, more tense in Layer 3. Luckily, Stumbler has left Bucky a code to solve this layer's new language, Beaver Scratch. Get used to nonsense, it's going to be mostly this from here on out. Beaver Scratch is a coded language that I wasn't able to figure out on my own. With help from Rytoast, I found out that Beaver Scratch is a Kama Sutra cipher where every letter is paired with the next. So A equals B, C equals D, etc. So if you see the letter C on a sign written in Beaver Scratch, it's actually the letter D, and vice versa. Regardless of this, as I mentioned earlier, this is where the Dwellers also begin attacking. The Dwellers are easily some of the most disturbing monsters I've seen in a horror game in a long time. Each of them is based on a mascot costume that you've likely already seen at this point in the game. However, their features are distorted, and the sounds they make are some of the most horrific in the game. I think in particular, Walter's noises are the most sickening to me. Walter is at first the only one to have any actual sort of voice play repeatedly, with it being a text-to-speech voice constantly trying to get Bucky to help him, just to draw him closer. These characters also all have special gimmicks that become apparent as you play. Walter is the character you want to be captured by the least at first, as he's capable of actually breaking the barrels that you may hide in. Giovanni is attracted to sound, which means playing a tape when he's around will draw him closer. Olive is the most difficult to avoid as she's actually capable of occupying the black bars on the side of the screen to see wherever you are. Together, these three will dog you almost constantly through the plaza. Out of all the Dwellers though, Blot has to be the most terrifying. Similar to Olive, Blot can peek through the black bars of your screen to look for you, but is otherwise more aggressive and in my opinion, way scarier. He also appears when you least expect it, when you may just be wandering through this aquarium not knowing of a threat at all. His sudden appearance and aggression is some of the best horror this game has to offer, and I think that that's what makes Shipwreck such a good horror game. The sudden, the unexplainable, it crops up everywhere. I didn't mention this earlier, but that kind of strange occurrence can even happen in Layer 1. In Walter's level, when the lights go out, there's a chance of seeing Walter himself or a human face. At one point in my playthrough, I even heard a distant voice calling out to Bucky. The game itself feels genuinely haunted in a way that makes your guts sink. These random occurrences are plentiful, and most of the time unpredictable. In some ways they remind me of things like seeing Shadow Bonnie in FNAF 2, but these are far scarier to encounter. The idea that a previous layer may be bleeding into one that is supposed to be safe is a terrifying thought to wrap your head around. So what separates Shipwrecked from other mascot horror titles? Well, style says a lot. This isn't the first mascot horror to choose a low poly style, nor is it the first haunted game. But what it does is push expectations in either direction. The dissonance between seeing these hyper-realistic images of Blot and Olive on the sides of your screen versus the low-poly Bucky who has to hide in a barrel. The clash of styles is just one way this game knows how to creep you out. Something this game has a mastery of is discomfort. Everywhere just feels like it's somewhere you shouldn't be. The game itself is a peek behind the curtain, seeing where the sausage is made. It doesn't matter if you understand it, it only matters that you're there, and there are monsters. This is something I feel hasn't been achieved with mascot horror in a long time. The actual last time I had this same exact feeling may be FNAF 1. It's a real nightmare scenario. But something else this game has up on many other mascot horrors is the way it takes inspiration from the analog horror genre. I think the most obvious comparison to this game would be Petscop, a real modern classic in the genre. Both Shipwrecked and Petscop take the form of unfinished games from the 90s that house a dark secret within. And although Petscop's horror may be more blunt and obvious, I think Shipwrecked has an incredible advantage since it's an actual playable experience. But with this comes a slight con. You see, With Shipwreck being so inspired by alternate reality games and analog horror, it can make a solo playthrough extremely difficult. This is a game that was meant to be beaten by a community, not just one person. One particular code involves reading sheet music for Ode to Joy. I don't know how to read sheet music. If I didn't have help, I never would have been able to get past this puzzle. In many ways, this can be seen as a pro, but I personally think this kind of makes the game feel permanently online. It's the same problem as when a single-player game requires an internet connection to work. Most of the time, that's okay, but in the off chance your internet goes out, you might be stuck. The ARG and analog horror element of this game cannot be overstated. So far, I've restricted myself to topics that can be found within the game itself, but a huge part of Shipwrecked is what you find on the outside. Legitimately, the code for one specific puzzle is hidden in your Steam achievements, and that's one of the more mild solutions because you're still within the Steam browser. Affiliated with Shipwrecked are several YouTube channels, including one ran by a character who Squeaks refers to as Vandal. This character can be seen in the bonus secrets menu, where he's called something similar. As it stands, Vandal's inclusion in this game and his appearance as JD, short for John Doe, is one of the most mysterious pieces of the puzzle, and it's one I would love to see expanded on. Fun fact, and this is something Squeaks told me on a separate occasion, but Vandal was never actually meant to be a specific animal when Squeaks was creating him, which I think adds another almost humorous layer of mystery to this already vague character. I don't know, to me he kinda looks like a rat. There's websites, secret files, plenty of YouTube videos, hell, an entire separate game, all of which correlates with actual in-game events, set pieces, and puzzles. And although it can be incredibly frustrating at times, I really can't say I dislike it. Shipwreck manages to successfully combine all these elements into a horror game and makes them work beautifully. Let me tell you about my discovery of the Cogware website. When I found this site, I clicked on the ad for Shipwrecked and began reading for my chat. And while I was somewhat distracted, the commercial on the website started playing on its own. It's a clever, unexpected jump scare that worked on me amazingly, and sincerely creeped me out. That's the kind of horror this game excels at, and it works pretty much every time. And tying all of it together is an amazing soundtrack. Now, I'm not a musician by any means, ergo why I can't read sheet music, but I know what I like, and this game from the beginning to end is banger after banger. Whether it be this actually really energetic title screen, or the more soft and almost crystalline ambience of the pool, or the panic-inducing duck and cover that happens whenever you're spotted, the music in this game ties it all together. One thing I need to praise the soundtrack for is reinforcing that sense of discomfort. No two pieces sound exactly alike, which makes them all feel like they come from separate, alien worlds almost. Just when you settle into one song, you move into another area and it's totally different. Then you get to Blott's aquarium, and there's nothing. Silence. And that's the eeriest moment in the game if you ask me. Audio sincerely cannot be understated as a tool in horror, and I'm glad to see it used to such an expert degree in this game. Then I found out Blott's silence was actually an accident on Squeaks' part. I sincerely hope this doesn't get patched out, as it's genuinely one of my favorite parts of the game. But maybe it's time we get the word from the beaver's mouth. I'd like to introduce you to Squeaks DeCorge, the lead developer of Shipwreck 64 and the voice of Bucky and Stumbler.
Howdy, hi, I go by Squeaks DeCorge. I am the creator of Shipwreck 64.
So the first thing I wanted to ask was, how do you feel in general about the mascot horror genre?
Most of it's trash, and it sucks. There's like genuinely good ideas there. Like, I am so tired of like the same gameplay loop every single. There's so much you can do there, but they just don't. You know, it's like they give you such good ideas, and they just don't work with them, and it makes me mad every single time.
I think you proved that more could be done with the formula for sure.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to do. Like, I didn't want to like hold back on anything. That was like my entire like thing with this. It's either go all the way or just don't go at all.
Where does Shipwreck come from as like a concept? Like, where did you first come up with the idea, this is what I want this game to be?
So the story of the game goes all the way back to 2016 when I was making Treasure Island like games. Because the developer released all the assets, and as a result, I was just kind of messing around with them and making my own fan game system for that. In 2020, I kind of reinvented it using, like, scrapping on Disney characters and using my own instead. That's where Bucky and everyone else came from. And then I kind of dropped the project for a while, and then I got reminded of, there's like a Mario 64 personalized recast thing. That was the thing that inspired the gameplay loop of Shipwreck. And then from there, back in 2021, I kind of just restarted development, and that's kind of, it escalated to the version that exists now, basically.
Is there anything specific that inspires you? Like any specific project in the past? Maybe you've worked on it, maybe you haven't. Just something that Shipwrecked comes from on a larger scale, I imagine.
Okay, so a few things. One of them was like really early, like creepypastas, if that makes sense. I used to be obsessed with those. It's like Ben Drowned, for instance, or what is it? I'm trying to give a good example. Abandoned by Disney is the thing that inspired most of the costumes and everything like that. But then there's also this is one series that I just love called the Monument Mythos. It's like an analog horror series, but it's like one of the few ones I actually watch unironically and enjoy.
One thing I noticed for sure when playing is that this is this game, I almost don't want to call it a mascot horror game because in my mind, mascot horror is a very hard genre to make scary. This game is fucking terrifying. So I wanted to know what scares you, like what inspires you to make the kind of horror that you do.
Okay, something I kind of picked up on over time is it's kind of weird. I like my horror to feel like otherworldly, and if it's not that, I want it to feel overwhelming. So back when I made Polar Dread, like the VR game, my goal for that game was just focus entirely on overwhelming the player, hitting with every little thing you can. But I think it was midway through the development of Shipwreck, I got really invested in like liminal horror. That was like a big thing I enjoyed at the time, and I kept looking into that and seeing what I could do with it. So I started with really rudimentary kind of levels, and I just wanted to kind of keep that liminal feel to it over time. But as time went on, I kind of adapted it into its own style, if that makes sense.
Do you have a particular favorite part or character in Shipwrecked? Like something you're especially proud of?
I think like the entire layer 3 sequence is like the best pulled open in like any game I've ever made. Like the way it just drops you in and like you're in this big open area and there's like all these buildings, but the entire place is still inside. You have no idea how proud I was of like that entire plaza section. It took so long. That entire map took like a month to make. But like, when it was done, it felt so rewarding.
Last question.
Alright.
Do you have any plans for the future of Shipwrecked? Like, do you plan on making this a continuing thing, or is this what there is?
Yeah, my main kind of like worry right now is I don't want to seem like I'm milking it. That's a class I want to do. So I'm not going to be pumping out sequels or anything. I want to keep it all to this one game and just kind of update it over time. So like, there's been people talking about like, oh, we haven't seen enough of Brandon or Vandal or whatever. I want to kind of conclude the story through updates as opposed to just like, you know, oh yeah, buy the sequel. You can see it all here. You know, I find like I'm like very cheap. So that's the idea. So what I thought about, which I wanted to kind of do, is I was thinking I'd be able to add like DLC, quote unquote, through ROM hacks. So it's like you'd be able to get new ROM hacks through the ARG, like unlock them, and then from there you can play new sections of the story that weren't accessible before.
Thank you, Squeaks, for coming here and answering these questions. You made a phenomenal game, and I'm very excited to talk about it and post this video.
Oh yeah, no, I'm excited to watch it. What do you think?
After my interview with Squeaks, I walked away with fresh hopes for the future of Shipwrecked. The possibilities to expand on this story are numerous, and I think that anyone who's beaten it can agree that more Shipwrecked is for the better. So much of the story is hinted at but never explained, namely in the case of JD or Vandal. Or how about what inspires Brandon, the man in the Bucky suit, to kill the other people in the costumes? I know I said I wouldn't harp on the story all that much, because I'm sure I don't fully understand it, but pieces could definitely be put in place to help me understand, you know? I think one of the darkest secrets actually comes much later on. Skip to the end of this video if you don't want to hear any spoilers, but we're going to be talking about what Stumbler is. The origin of Stumbler O'Hare, as we find out in one of the last audio logs left by Connor Thomas, the head of the team creating Shipwrecked. Stumbler's initial creation was included as a mocking statement towards the wife of Mark, who had lost her arms in an accident. It was because of her hospital bills that Mark pulled the plug on the game's production and budget. In a way, Stumbler's inclusion is a joke. This actually explains why Stumbler is so separate from most other characters. He's alone because he's not Bucky's friend. He's a mocking statement. And that's going to be my coverage of Shipwreck 64, at least for the moment. I highly recommend you watch my stream VOD so you can see through most of my experience with this game. A game I'd be proud to say is one of my new all-time favorite horror games. It really pushes the boundaries of the medium. It expands on what works with old creepypasta stories and tosses what doesn't. There's no fluff here. Every minute is engaging content that informs you on the story its characters, and the larger world around it. I love this game, and I would highly recommend it for just about anyone with a passing interest in this style of horror. ARGs, creepypastas, analog horror, mascot horror, it all comes from the same place really. Shipwrecked 64 is a hodgepodge of horror that emphasizes community-wide storytelling, and I really cannot give it enough credit. If my rambling about it hasn't convinced you to buy this game yet, then maybe the link in the description will. I figure it's plenty fair of me to try and boost this game's sales with how nice Squeaks was during not just the interview, but the entire development process. Before the game actually released publicly, Squeaks gave me a free copy, one I opened up and played around in for a bit before deciding I needed to wait. And I'm glad I did. Being able to stream it and have Squeaks actually there with me, or any of my other friends who joined me, made the game a lot more interesting and fun. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe, and make sure you check out my last video where I talked about the Mimic family tree in the FNAF series. Until then, I'm Demuted. Peace.